Okay, guys, let us continue. Okay, so we left off looking at adjustment layers, right? And we know that adjustment layers are a special kind of Photoshop layer that basically adjusts the information on the layers below them. All right. So let's look at an example of what an adjustment layer is and why we would want to use it over our regular style of adjustments. All right. So I have this image here. It's a segment of a library from a previous project that I was working on. All right. And first thing I'm going to do is duplicate the layer, sorry. So okay, duplicate layer. All right. So let me show you an easy example to explain what I mean. All right. Now I duplicate the background layer only because I want to maintain my original background. I don't want to change it, right? So this one, we're going to perform a destructive edit. And then afterwards, we're going to use an adjustment layer to do a non-destructive edit to accomplish the same thing, all right? So let's say we wanted to convert this image to black and white, right? Or we want to desaturate it. We could do that in a couple of different ways. One of the tools that I really like, the adjustment tools, is the Hue Saturation, right? So let's look at this one first. We could really just go desaturate to get it to black and white, right? But Hue Saturation, right? So the Hue Saturation adjustment basically allows you to adjust the hue, meaning the colors in an image, right? So that is adjusting the hue, right? And the saturation adjusts the intensity of the colors. So you can get very intense, not so intense. You can desaturate it completely to get it to black and white, or you can exaggerate the colors if you increase the saturation, right? And of course, the lightness just makes it extra light or extra dark, right? Depending on your preference. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna convert this image to black and white. We're gonna make it a bit dark, right? You notice Hue has no effect here because we have no colors. Let's click OK. So what happened essentially is we removed all of the color information from that layer, and we did so destructively. That means we cannot come back to it at all. We could step back, yes, we could edit and undo Hue saturation and get back to our previous state. But if we did that and we actually perform a number of tasks after, we would not be able to step back to as far as that point, right? So that actually accomplishes what we want, but it does so destructively. How would we do so non-destructively? I'm going to duplicate my background layer again, and I'm going to show you the way that you could do it. Now, one thing to note is, well, the first thing that you might consider is we could turn it into a smart object, right? So let's do that. Let's convert that to a smart object. That way it maintains all of our pixel data intact, so we do not lose that important information when we make the adjustments. But look at this. If I have a smart object here, I go to image adjustments. Sorry, adjustments, Hue saturation. Saturated. Okay. Notice what happens. If I convert it into a smart object, right? Before I apply the adjustment layer, what happens is not the adjustment layer, but before I apply the adjustment applies as a smart filter. And because it's a smart filter, we can actually disable it or enable it at any point in time and get back our full color information that was in our image previously. We can also edit the filter to adjust how our hue and saturation affects our image, right? So we can tweak it as we need, as much as we want, and still always come back to our original file, our original document, or original pixels. Everybody see that?
So you can do it again, please.
Do it again. All right. So basically what I did was the very same thing. Let me remove that layer. Right. So I just duplicated the background layer to get it, to get a copy of it. So that way we can always come back to the original background to work with. And instead of just going directly to image adjustments and applying an adjustment here, if I convert it to a smart object, right, and I apply the adjustment, notice it applies the adjustment as a smart filter. So let's just do this quickly.
And in the morning, the tide rises.
Right. As a smart filter, we can always at any point in time disable it or edit it by just double clicking on the layer and tweak it to the way that we want. We can bring the color back, for instance, or we can make the color text. Yeah. All right. But we looked at smart objects in the last class, so that's not actually what we're going to look at today. So let's keep it here. Let's name this layer smart object. Right. So we have our destructive edit, we have our smart object edit, but let's look at our adjustment layer. So I'm going to make that invisible, and this time I'm going to work with the same background layer, meaning I'm not going to duplicate it at all. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add an adjustment layer. Now we can add an adjustment layer in a couple of different ways. The easiest way probably is to use the add adjustment button. So if you look at the bottom of your layers panel, you have a button here, that circular button with half black, half white, that will allow you to add an adjustment or a fill layer, right? So if we click on that button, we can select the adjustment, and we've been working with the Hue Saturation Adjustment. So let's click on Hue Saturation. And it adds a layer, but it takes me directly to the properties panel where I can make the same adjustment, reduce the saturation, and drop the lightness a bit. Now, when I go back to my layers panel, notice that's my original background. My other two layers with the destructive edit and the smart object are both invisible, right? So I have my original background layer and a hue saturation adjustment layer that essentially turns my background layer into black and white. If I make that layer invisible, the effect of that layer is removed, and therefore we get the full color back. So even though it's black and white, look at the background image. You can see it's still in full color. Let me duplicate it at this point. And notice it's still black and white. Now the adjustment layers apply the effects to all of the layers below them, right? So if I were to take that background copy layer and move it physically above my hue saturation adjustment layer, what do you think is going to happen? The effect of my adjustment layer will not apply to any layers above it, right? So it works on all of the layers below it, none of those above it. Everybody understand that?
Yes.
All right. Now, if I wanted to modify my adjustment, let's remove this layer. So I have this, right? Let's say I wanted to modify my adjustment. I wanted to add, let's say I want to exaggerate the color rather than remove all of the color. Can anybody tell me how I would make that change?
Increase the saturation.
How would I go about increasing saturation? Where would I go to do that?
No go on image and
image. No, but remember that's a destructive edit. But look at it. If I'm on my hue saturation layer, right? My adjustment layer, and I go image, look at this. I don't have the option to do adjustments because that layer doesn't have any content. It's just an adjustment layer. So no, not from the image adjustments. Somewhere else. Anybody can tell me? So while you're on the adjustment layer, if you want to make an adjustment to that adjustment layer, you need to go into the properties panel. We spoke about the properties panel earlier. We looked at it when we were looking at smart objects. You should know where to find it, how to make it visible, right? Notice if we select the hue saturation adjustment layer, go to properties, what it shows us is our hue and saturation controls. And from there, I can make any changes that I want to that adjustment layer and have it reflected on all of the layers below it. Everybody see that? Now, what if I didn't want it to apply to certain areas? What if I wanted it to affect some areas of my image, but not others? Does anybody have any suggestions as to how I could do that?
So go and select tools.
Select tools, okay. So I'm gonna use, let's just use our rectangular marquee. Yes, tell me what next?
Then just in the area you want to just sting it, right? Drag it.
So,
okay.
So you're saying that if we wanted to affect the books, we should select the books?
That's okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And then what? That's it?
No, then you. That part there, you know what I part.
Then you want to mask it.
Yes, mask it, mask it.
So if we wanted to affect the books, right? What we want to do is, so notice our adjustment layer has a mask that we can edit, right? We can make the selection, and let's go to layer mask. Actually, let's do it that way instead. So I would select the reverse actually, and then I would just use this option. So create a mask and then layer. Actually, rather than add another layer mask, because we already have a mask on that layer, we can actually just edit it, right? So we go into edit it by filling it black. So if we want to hide any areas, we know we paint black on the mask. I'm going to use fill, happen much faster. Let's just fill that area black on the mask. All right. Everybody see the adjustment layer mask? And now if we go to the properties and I desaturate, sorry, not the mask, but the adjustment. All right, we go to properties and I desaturate it. Notice it affects, well, a little bit more than half of the image. So basically it affects the non-masked areas of the image. Everybody see that?
Yeah.
Right. So our original image, which is the background layer, still exists, but we can get it to simulate black and white without actually changing any of the pixel data by using an adjustment layer. Now, adjustment layers do different things. You don't need to study all of them or cram all of them, but you need to understand the main ones. So let's go through the main ones. I have them in that document for you so you could review. So the 5 basic adjustment layers and how to use them. I basically just demonstrated how to use them. Let's go through the 5 basic ones. We'll figure out what they are. And then I'm gonna let you guys experiment with that as well for homework, okay? So to use an adjustment layer, click on its icon in the adjustment layers panel. So I showed you one way to do it, which is pulling up the adjustments from here, right? You can also, let me just do it a different way. So let's delete this one. We're gonna delete that adjustment layer, and we're gonna add an adjustment layer another way. So we select the layer that we want to apply it to, which is the area where we want it above, and we go to our adjustments panel. If you don't have your adjustments panel, window adjustments, right? From there, you see all of the adjustments layer. We have brightness, contrast, levels, curves, exposure, vibrance, and hue saturation right there. We have a few others, color bands, but these I'm going to let you guys experiment with it on your own. Those very same options you have from the adjustments menu, all right? But the adjustments menu will give you destructive edits, while the adjustments layers will give you non-destructive. So to add a hue saturation adjustment layer, we simply click on the hue saturation adjustment. And again, notice it automatically takes us to the properties panel, because that is where we make the adjustments. So let's do something different. Again, let's change the color. This time, let's change the color of all of the blues, just to do something different. So we want to select all of the blues, and let's make them red, I suppose. So with that, we essentially just select the particular color range. So that's the blues, and we tweak the hue to get the color that we want. So red is a little bit messy, and the blue, let's go for green, right? We'll keep it in that color. Everybody sees the adjustment. It's not very apparent, but if I remove the adjustment layer, this is the original image. So you can see also it changes all of the blue in the layer, in the background layer, including the blue that is beyond in the other building, in the window in front of the person on the computer, right? If we did not want the adjustment layer to affect this area of the image, right? What we would essentially do is create a mask, right? Or where we actually have a mask, but to edit the mask, sorry about that. Edit the mask so that it will ignore that part of the image. So let's do that. Make a selection, right? And we can edit the mask. We already have a mask on the layer, so we click on the mask, and we can use a brush tool as well. Let me just paint it in black. So if you look at my mask, when I'm done, you should see a black square here, right? Indicating the area that has been masked off. And now you can see the hue saturation adjustment layer only affects the areas that are unmasked. Everybody get that, right? Excuse me, go over it, you said?
Yes, the mask.
The mask. Okay, so let's go back. So your adjustment layers, when you add an adjustment layer, notice it comes with well, your layer thumbnail, which is an adjustment layer, but it also comes with a mask right here. Yeah?
Yes, sir.
Right. The very same way that you know to edit your masks, you can edit your mask in your adjustment layer. That way you can also add additional masks if you want, or you can mask out your images. But to mask the adjustment layer, you simply click on the mask on the layer and you paint in black, right? That's how you modify your mask. So that's a simple way. Right? Wherever you paint in black will be masked. So this time, let's mask out the reverse of the image. So hue saturation. And the reason why you may see me doing a little bit of different things, but the reason why I first make a selection is the selection essentially constrains my color. So I can just paint indiscriminately and I will only be painting within my selection. Or I could go edit, fill, and I could just apply a solid fill black And again, it would only apply within my selection, as you can see here. So at this point, my adjustment layer has been masked, but it's not, it doesn't have any adjustments being made. I could click on the layer, go to the properties panel, and then make my adjustments there. Let's make it black and white. So everybody can see what happened. Part of the image became black and white and part stayed in full color. All right. Let's adjust that. I think what we did the last time was the color shift. So to change the color, let's just, again, we're doing the same thing over, changing the color of the blues. So typically when you use the hue saturation, it works on the master, right? Or the master colors. Master means it's going to affect all of the colors on your document. However, you can constrain it to affect only the reds, only the yellows, only the greens, only the cyans, only the blues, or the magentas. If you notice what we have there, red, green, and blue, and cyan, magenta, yellow. Black is not in that list because we have the lightness here, which essentially affects the black, right? So your main colors, RGB and CMYK, essentially you have the option to select them here. Let us use yellow this time. So we're going to adjust the yellows and see what color we can make it. Let's make them, well, red. Everybody see that? The desk, it wasn't exactly yellow, it was kind of like a varnish brown, but we essentially changed the yellow parts of it to red, and that did not affect the rest of the image. We can always come back on our adjustment layer mask and look at this. I'm going to adjust my mask by painting on it this time with white. And I'm going to paint over those yellow books to see if I can get them to change. So now you can see the effect of the mask. Well, on the area that I painted, the yellow area. Let's just take out everything. So all of the yellows in the image is going to be adjusted by the mask. All right. So look at our mask, completely white now, meaning it's affecting everything, everywhere in the image. So this is the effect without the adjustment layer. And this is it with the adjustment layer. So the adjustment layer allows you to not manipulate your original data at all. Your original data, your original pixels stay the same, right? And all of your adjustment happens on a separate layer that is independent of your actual layer. Everybody see that?
Yes, sir.
All right. Now, why would you opt to use an adjustment layer rather than a smart object and a smart filter? Any ideas?
Because smart objects will allow you to do it. They restrict you.
No, a smart object will allow you to do it as well. Let me show you one of the advantages of let me show you probably the major advantage of an adjustment layer. So you can affect all layers, including layers that were not on your document yet, right? So let me scale it to fit. So we can see I added another layer, right? And it's currently not being affected by the adjustment layer. However, if I move the adjustment layer above it, I'm not sure if you saw it, but let's see again. So if the adjustment layer is below that new layer, it looks like this, unaffected. If we move the adjustment layer above it, it changes all the yellow to red. Everybody see that? Let me add another layer. Don't have too much yellow there, but right? So you can see right now it's unaffected by my adjustment layer, but if I move it below my adjustment layer, or I move my adjustment layer below above it, not much difference here. But the good thing is I can go back to my adjustment layer, go to my properties, and let's do something a little bit different. What if I wanted to make the reds a different color? I could select the reds here and adjust the hue of only the reds. And essentially, I've made all of the reds blue, right? Now we have a blue cap on that other image. Let me select the blues and let's see if we can make the blues red. Okay, we have multiple adjustments, so it might be ideal, and it's actually breaking up on the colors. You can see actually because we have yellows. We have plenty of adjustments. But anyway, you can see here that my adjustment layer doesn't just affect my background layer, but it also affects every other layer that is directly below it, or that is below it, whether directly or indirectly, right? So if you wanted to accomplish that same thing with a smart object, you would actually have to combine your layers, meaning those 3 layers, into a single smart object, which would impede your editing, right? Or you would have to use multiple adjustment layers and mask them to the layer that you're looking at, which can be a bit troublesome. So with a single adjustment layer, you can affect your entire image, meaning your entire document, all of the layers in your document at one time with a single adjustment layer. And you can constrain the adjustments by using your mask. Everybody understand that? Any questions on the adjustment layer so far? Okay, so let's just go through that document and then I will leave you guys to your experimentation. All right. Okay, so to use an adjustment layer, taking it from here, click on its icon in the adjustment layers panel, and then you can dial in the effect you want in the properties panel. The controls for each adjustment layer are different and specific to its purpose. So we've been looking at the hue saturation, right? Additionally, for homework, in addition to the flyer is actually not for the next class, but for the next class, I want you guys to experiment with your 5 basic adjustment layers, right? I don't necessarily need to see any examples. I will actually probably see that in your other documents, your flyers and your other documents you'll be working on for me. But at least understand how to use them, master it, and if you have any questions, you get back to me. All right. So each adjustment layer automatically comes with a layer mask. That way you can have it affect certain areas of your image instead of the entire thing. Photoshop has 16 different adjustment layers. However, if you're just starting out, there are only 5 you need to be familiar with, and you'll learn about the others later on. What do you think the 5 are? The basic ones, brightness and contrast. Does everybody understand what brightness and contrast does? Not quite. Okay, so the brightness and contrast adjustment layer is the simplest way to adjust the exposure or contrast of an image. Basically, the exposure means how much light is in the image. So a brighter image would have more light and the object would look more white, right? A less bright image would be darker and the object would be darker. The contrast refers to the difference between the brightest bright and the whitest white, okay? So it might take some playing around to understand it, but let me just demonstrate. And that's probably the last adjustment layer that I'll demonstrate before leaving you to your experimentation. But let us delete this one. And let us add the brightness and contrast layer, right? Now we can see I'm applying it. Let's remove those other objects. Let's just look at that one image. So if I make it very bright, see, it gets whiter. If I make it less bright, it gets darker. You have the option for legacy here. Legacy basically exaggerates it. The non-legacy, meaning the version I use now, is a bit more discreet in how it adjusts the brightness and the contrast. But if you use legacy, for instance, right, and you bring the brightness all the way up, what you're going to get is essentially a whitewashed image. All the way down, you get a darker one. All right, so you have that option if it not get suiting your fancy. Contrast basically adjusts the difference between the whitest whites and the blackest blacks, so you get more rich tones essentially with more contrast. Yeah, so you can play around with it, get different options. And yeah, all right, so that I'm gonna leave for you guys to experiment on your own. So you drag the brightness slider to brighten things, but you drag it to the right to brighten things, and you drag it to the left to darken things. Same for the contrast, you drag it to the right to add contrast, and you drag it to the left to take it away, as I was just demonstrating. It's pretty straightforward. If you don't want it to affect a certain area, you mask off that area. Levels. What are your levels? The levels adjustment layer is another way to adjust exposure and contrast. So it's another way to adjust brightness and contrast, but it does it in a more intuitive way using histograms, right? And different sliders. So you drag the black handle right here under the histogram to darken your image. You drag the white to brighten it, and you drag the gray to adjust your midtones. All right. Essentially, there are a number of options that you can go through here, but experiment with it, play around with it, look at the different presets that you have, right? Try them out, and let me know what you come up with. Curves. So the curves adjustment layer is the most powerful and advanced way to modify exposure and contrast. So yet another way to adjust your exposure and contrast, or your brightness and contrast. It's a bit beyond what most beginners, However, it'll frequently pop up in tutorials. And yes, tutorials like to use curves because of its powerful adjustments, right? It's a bit difficult to understand. So my best advice is simply play around with it and try your best. Okay. But basically, the slope line over the histogram represents the current tones in the image. Changing the slope of the line determines how each of these tones is affected. So you can adjust your line in different ways. Jumping down. Hue saturation. Well, I've been explaining the hue saturation tool, so we don't need to go over it. But basically, it's a simple way to adjust the colors in your image. Every color has a hue, meaning the color, the tint, a saturation, meaning the intensity of the color, and a lightness value. The hue saturation adjustment layer sliders correspond to them, and you drag the slider around to get different effects, basically. You also have a few other controls. You can adjust master color, which is all of the colors or specific colors, right? Or you can opt to colorize. So again, play around with these options, see what you come up with, okay? Now, the ACA exam does not expect you to cram any of these options, just to know how to access them and modify them when you need. On the exam, if they want you to do anything there, they will be giving you specific settings, right? They will be telling you, set your hue to 54, set your saturation to 12, and your lightness to 15, all right? So you will just need to follow the appropriate instructions. In your designing, though, you will have to figure out what you need and how to accomplish it. And black and white. I don't think I need to say much about black and white here. Again, experiment with it, but it's actually the best way. I know we did it with the hue saturation, and you can do it with all of the other tools, but the black and white adjustment layer is the best way to convert an image to black and white. It has 6 sliders, one for each of Photoshop's primary colors, and again, we know what the primary colors are, RGB, CMY, and black is not a primary color, so it's not included there. But RGB, CMY would be your primary colors, right? And you drag your sliders to adjust the grayscale level in the color when it's converted into black and white. All right. So in conclusion, adjustment layers are the best way to modify the tones and colors of your images. But most importantly, they don't change the original pixels, meaning it's non-destructive. So you can always go back in and tweak things. Some adjustment layers like curves can be a bit tricky to get grips with, but it's worth the effort. They're a huge part of most Photoshop work. All right, guys, so these are the 5 adjustment layers that I want you to be very familiar with. You can feel free to play around with the others. You should understand how all of them work, but at least try out these 5. My advice, try it out on an actual photo so you can see its effect across multiple tonal content, right? And let me know if you have any issues applying them and customizing them to your needs. All right. Any questions?
So when is the exam exactly?
When is the exam?
Mm-hmm.
The exam, you will be given a time. We might cut off less than a minute. If it does, I will send a new link. But the exam is essentially after you've done the course and I feel like you're ready for the exam, you will schedule the exam with BTC. All right, they will give you a time period, maybe a week, 2 weeks, and you will select your best time during that time when you can go in and do the exam. It's just about an hour. But if you're doing it outside of the confines of this particular course, the exam can be done at any point in time. You just need to create an appointment. It's an online exam. You can do it 3 o'clock in the morning if BTC will allow you to. Just arrange the time with them and come and do your exam on your appointment.